Hey, it's E.B. Moss, and this is episode 26 of season 2 of Insider Interviews, where you get the insider scoop on the business of media, marketing, and advertising. Now, this is going to be another double scoop, all about podcasting. Yep, like episode 25, I captured 2 amazing people during Podcast Movement in August, and the first up for the bulk of the episode is Jason Hoch.
We don't talk enough about audio as a transportation mechanism. So I close my eyes as a listener and I'm transported to the West Texas area of the Permian Basin. And I'm learning about people and industry and history and culture and drama.
Jason is one of the most beloved people, at least in my book, in the podcast industry. Jason ran HowStuffWorks, and now he's moved on to create the #1 show in the world through his own company, Wavland. Then, you know what you need in podcasting? Ease of discoverability. So I got the guy who is turning me into a parlor trick. Mathew Passy has a new podcast beacon that you just hold up to a phone and boom, you can connect to insider interviews. Stay tuned, you're going to learn a lot in this episode. I'm sitting in the atrium of the Gaylord Resort with an old friend who's making his return appearance on Insider Interviews, Jason Hoch.
Hi.
Hi, friend. How are you?
Well, we've had a gap between interviews, but not a gap between knowing each other. How's that?
Well, that is my great pleasure. I'm so fortunate to call you, I'll just say, a good industry friend. How's that?
I think that's lovely.
Thank you. Me too. And what I think is lovely is that you would deign to return to Insider Interviews, because I just want to give you a couple of numbers. Okay, Jason? 250 million, 36. Do those numbers sound familiar?
Yes.
Okay. Let's explain for the studio audience. In your illustrious career in podcasting, you have had 250 million worldwide downloads of your shows that you have innovated, overseen, executive produced. Is that right?
Yep, and made. Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, that's the journey. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, it doesn't stop. You are the master storyteller. You've launched more than 30 podcasts, and kind of an illustrious start. You really, I think, helped put it on the map to a great degree back in your past with HowStuffWorks.
Yeah.
And that's where you were when we first spoke.
That's right, and I was Chief Content Officer overseeing that team, and it was, podcast was nascent at the time, nascent industry, and we were starting to get some of our first numbers of actually what this meant, and I remember being surprised when, PodTrack charts were coming out, and we realized, wait, we're in like the top 4 or 5 or whatever it was in the rankings, and we didn't really have any perspective or anything to compare ourselves with anyone else at the time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we saw NPR and iHeart and all these other brands. Even though we hadn't known what was going on, it was affirming to know that we were on the right track and that people were actually listening and that we were respected as a brand, and it was, multiple shows and all those things. I remember that very clearly. And since then, it's been that journey to continue to tell stories, and I think looking back at those days too, we didn't have a narrative track, so limited series and being able to tell those stories. We had lots of, great weekly shows like Stuff You Should Know and Stuff You Missed in History Class and a whole collection. But I was kind of hungry for maybe, having Serial come out and all that happen. What would be our version of that?
And so narrative, you mean more storytelling?
Yeah, like an 8-episode series about a certain story or topic or event that's happened. And others were really experimenting and getting that right. And what we found at that time was those stories tend to be the chart toppers, the one that were the water cooler conversations that were crossing over to newspaper reporting about the podcast and all of that. And it felt really good. And so I got really obsessed with what is our version of that going to be. And it was around that time that Apple famously visited our offices in Atlanta. We had moved into a brand new space, gorgeous 10,000 square foot space with custom studios, and people were really energized. And Apple got a tour. It was in an old 100-year-old Sears building.
This is around when?
It was around...
What year?
About 2016, 17.
Okay, we're just hitting our, commercial aspect of podcasting stride right around then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had known the Apple team, but for them to actually show up and recognize us and want to spend some time on our turf in Atlanta, Georgia, it was incredible. And I remember saying, well, we have to go upstairs and meet Payne and the Tenderfoot team.
Uh-huh.
And I said, what are you talking about? They're like, oh, have you not heard the show Up and Vanished? This guy, Payne Lindsay, just launched it, him and his business partner, Donald.
Right?
Yeah, and by the way, he's in your building upstairs. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And so I kind of knew what it was, so I binged it, of course.
Yeah.
Got caught up. I was like, okay, yeah, this is good. And I sent Payne an email, within a couple days after that. And we connected and got to know each other. He came down to the office, and we famously tell this story many times, including on his most recent podcast, Talking to Death. And I looked at him and I said, we need to do something together, and I think it should be the Wayne Williams Atlanta child murder story right here in our backyard. And he's like, yeah, we were talking about that too.
Wow.
And so we agreed on literally that day, we're going to do it. And we made it. And it was an absolute explosive hit. Transcended,
wow.
Just scores and scores of downloads. I wish I could tell you the latest, but it is a massive number. And it did all those things. And, that happens. It was his follow-up to Up and Vanish, so people were hungry to hear a new thing from him. And then, from us, and our ability to put that together as partners was awesome. And that just really got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So that's where all these shows really started, and I fell in really hard.
Yeah.
And that's been a little bit of the through line of my career since.
I want to read something off of your personal website
Sure.
that talks about you. I'm going to use my best narration voice. In the voice of Jason Hoch. I have an unquenchable thirst for fresh, original stories and the people behind them. A single tear from an unexpected revelation, the twang of laughter from a busy diner. I transport millions of people to places they've never been, forging friendships with those who were once strangers. Our world is moving faster than ever, and if we don't tell these stories, they're bound to be lost forever. I love that paragraph. It speaks to the personal you and the thumbprint that's behind creating shows like you did, and that you've since moved forward with now at Wavland.
Yeah. Listen, I've learned a lot along the way, and I've learned a lot from people who, frankly, told us their life story. They told us about their struggles, about their happiness. They've told us about the place that they live in, about their family, about all the things that affect us every day. And let me give you an example of that. Boomtown, that I produced with Texas Monthly, didn't know anything about West Texas. And so I showed up there. It was about 5 years ago now. And I flew into Austin and drove out to West Texas and met Christian Wallace, the host and reporter, a former Wildcatter. He played Friday Night Lights football in West Texas. His family knows the oil industry, and they're just great, great people. And I realized driving from Austin out to the Permian Basin, I see this big flame 25 miles away on this flat highway. I see this big flame in the distance. And it's nothing I'd ever seen in person. It just always felt fake because I'd never seen this thing. But
like a
it
bad
is
Jimmy
real.
Dean movie. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I realized that one of my missions in my career, in my life, was now realizing that starting with this place, it's the most important, really, place in the world because of oil and production and what that means for so many industries, but also so many people.
Okay.
The booms and the busts and all of that. And it really did change my life because I didn't know anything about the place or the people that were working there, that were working in the diners or the barber shops or in the fields. And we talk about the intimacy of audio, and I think that's really important talking point. We've talked about it over and over and over again. We get it, right?
Yep.
But we don't talk enough about audio as a transportation mechanism. So I close my eyes as a listener, and I'm transported to the West Texas area of the Permian Basin. And I'm learning about people and industry and history and culture and drama and tragedy and all those things in Boomtown. And I said, you know what? This is going to be the hallmark of every show I do from here on out.
Aww.
And it just hit me.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a little bit of me being Midwestern kid who never flew overseas. I got my passport, you know, like 7 years ago. I never had,
Wow.
you know, Chinese food or anything authentic like that till I was in my 30s. You know, it was just kind of sheltered, but it was a big, wide open world that you're like a sponge, right?
Yeah.
And so when you sit with people and you're not in a hurry and you let them talk and they tell you their story, it is so amazing and refreshing and incredible, no matter what the story is, great, happy, sad, or whatever. And so again, that's my through line in my career of like, how do I make those shows? And I think the other thing that, reflecting back on industry and the business, you know, every industry hits something where they need to scale.
Yes.
Right? We need to get bigger. How do we create more shows? How do we find more creators? How do we get more downloads? All those things. How do we sell more ads? It is always going to be the nature of anything from YouTube views to website hits to anything like that, right? I understand it. I feel like maybe the last couple of years we lost a little bit of our mojo with regards to storytelling. That some of the original creators have kind of disappeared and we haven't heard from them, which breaks my heart. We are making shows that don't deeply connect to listeners like they used to. There's an all-star roster across this country of people who are gifted storytellers, and they've done maybe one of these or two and they've disappeared, or they're print people who don't know that they could be a star in the podcast industry, right? Like, they have a gift. I talk about this often. A gift for story, just something that snaps, instincts, being able to knock on doors in person and sit with people. Those are the people I'm looking for. And so rather than wait for the rest of the industry to hopefully get this and understand it and do it, I just said, screw it. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to make as many of these as I can in as many areas of the country as I can and tell our country's story.
So you got the spark from Boomtown, and your epiphany is sort of tied to the recognition that audio is theater of the mind. We used to say radio is theater of the mind, but really it's all audio in my book. And so transporting yourself into a different place, exposing the listener to something, you know, if they can't see that oil rig burning in person, then, you know,
they feel it.
Describe it for them.
Yeah,
exactly. And then we personalize it. The funny thing is that you may have just gotten your passport a few years ago, but in my mind, I think of you a little like Forrest Gump with "Run, Forrest, run!"
Right.
Because you've taken up running now, so you're seeing everything.
And I'm all over the world now,
You
and it's
are.
like it's a.
And you're bringing us all over the world. So you have a huge show right now. So you've continued to carry that burning torch. Tell us about Noble and some of the other things you're producing now with Wavland.
Yeah, so Noble is a super special show. It's also a tough show to listen to, and that's okay. So Noble is about a scandal that happened in 2002 in the northwest region of Georgia, right next to the border of Tennessee and Alabama, which is the tri-state.
And I've never been there, so when I listen, I'm picturing it.
Yeah, I don't even know that it has a stoplight. But it has a rich history, and this big scandal happened. It blew up. 339 bodies were ultimately found on the property at a crematory run by a prominent family that had really earned their way out of, a tragic past in slavery and the Civil War events and everything that happened. And so they were very well regarded in the community. And so for this to happen in the community was a big deal.
Yes.
But it became a national story, of course, anytime something this big happens. Also, the deeper theme here is we talk about death in very blunt terms. What happens when you die, when your body decomposes and all those things.
Yeah.
And we do it because I think in the wrong hands, this could be a terrible show, and on the wrong network, with the wrong team, you can understand how this would feel sensational and just not good.
Yeah.
But potentially still popular. That's not the show I want to make. So this show is not only about what happened in deeply reported and detailed, breakouts of the episodes, it is also a commentary on how the living revere the dead. And that's really important because I believe that all of us are running from death and we don't want to confront it. And here's an opportunity by listening to this to have some of those uncomfortable conversations around death for loved ones and also those that are gone, and how we take care of people when they die, how we remember them when they die, but also what happens when things go wrong when this happens. And for such a dark potential topic, it is one of the most exquisitely written and produced series I've ever worked on.
Oh,
and that says
Jason.
something. And that is a shout out to the team, Sean Revive and Johnny Kaufman and the Campside team, who I adore and I've always wanted to work with. And so I believe that we made the perfect show. So you make a show like this, and I don't want to make this show for just 10 people. So how do we make a show for as massive of an audience as we can?
Especially for a show that has a basically uncomfortable subject matter.
That we can't look away from. So we want to make these, big popular shows, but we also don't want to water it down and make it something that is less than it should be or not memorable. And so that even though you're hearing this story, you're hearing some deeper themes that hit everyone right in the gut.
Yeah.
And that is the point. That is the magic. That is the secret to a Wavland show in anything that I do. And just walking around the conference here at Podcast Movement, obviously I know a lot of people, and they might say, hey, congrats on being number one. That's so awesome. You're having a great year. Love that. But then people who either I know or I'm meeting for the first time say, oh, I'm on episode 4. I can't wait for the next episode to come out. That's shocking to me that they're actually listening. Like, we all kind of say, yeah, I'll check it out. Like, sounds good. The fact that they're listening, it blows my mind.
Well, it's validation, especially in a community of people with a lot of discretion in podcasting. You've raised the bar, I think, Jason. And to that concept of Noble, the show, that line from your paragraph that says, a single tear from an unexpected revelation. I mean, you're delivering on the promise and the hope of what you want to achieve. So my hat's off to you.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit, just to wrap things up, on the less fun side of things, the business side of things. With a tough topic like Noble, how is it in terms of finding the ad-supported aspect of things, concerns about brand suitability or comfort level for brands, and that kind of effect?
I think you could argue, how different is it from Serial or any of the bigger things that have happened over the years? I think you want to associate yourself with high-quality storytelling. Listen, there's shows like True Detective, Night Country, and there's The Sopranos. Are those true crime? What is defined as that? So there's all these layers to storytelling that I think smart brands will understand the affinity and the connection and, frankly, the passion and enthusiasm of a listening audience.
Right.
That being said, if I put this show out and it was number one and I look at the ratings and reviews and there was 3 ratings or 10 ratings and the average review score was 1 or 2 stars, then I would be concerned. The fact that each of my shows, again, blows my mind, are doing 4.7 or 4.8 out of 5 on Apple or 5 out of 5 on Spotify.
Yeah.
It validates the quality. It's visible to those brands, but also to the consumers. And you look at the reviews and it says, this is tough for me, but this is raised the bar. It's fair. It's great quality. I get it, and I'm here for it.
Oh,
and so all those touch points, I think, matter.
Good. 2 last questions, and I think that this will probably resonate with you a lot. It's important for me to understand how you're either enabling brand purpose or illustrating brand purpose from Wavland? Like, what are the things that are important to you as a company or you personally?
For my own brand?
You can answer it that way. I mean, you run Wavland, so I assume that you inject some of those values into your company too.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to my days at Imperative, where I started the podcast division there. They're a movie studio. They produced high quality, Killers of the Flower Moon,
Yep.
and Neon is part of that studio family. Incredible stuff like Parasite, right? So it was a high bar to hit, but also a sweet spot for telling dramatic stories. That's kind of what they did. They weren't doing, Superman or Batman or Harry Potter or anything.
And they weren't doing podcasts until you got there either.
Yeah, and I never thought that Imperative would be a brand that people would recognize as a consumer brand in podcasts. And we ended up getting Best of Apple 2 years in a row for one of the top subscriber channels. And something snapped at me that said, wow, they actually understand what this brand is about. That's really exciting to me. They understand how all these brands stitch together. And so when I started Wavland, I said, I know that this brand can be successful. I know that I can create some of the best podcasts that have ever been made in this space, and that people are going to understand what that brand, Wavland, means. Mm-hmm. And so I'm seeing this. I'm seeing the feedback from listeners, again, in the comments, on social media, in the reviews. I came for one Wavland show, and I've stayed for all the rest. This is amazing. What is next? And I talk about this often as something that's, inspirational and aspirational for me. When you look at, like the Sunday night shows on HBO, where you go from Game of Thrones to Succession to Mayor of Easttown to The White Lotus, those shows could not be any different. Yeah. They're so different. But there's something that the consumer says, you know what, everything they do is really good. So even if I'm not really sure about this one, I'm in for the next one and the next one. Like before The Sopranos was a hit, it was just an idea that was a trailer that people were like, I don't know what this is, I'm going to give it a run. But they jumped in and they trusted it, and then they followed it for many seasons. And so my hypothesis or theory, or even North Star, if you will, of Wavland is I believe that I can create incredible podcasts with the best creators out there, many of which I've worked with before.
Yep.
I get so many great inbounds to me. I get the best stuff now. I know I can pull this off. So I can take listeners from High Roller Heist, which is about a motorcycle bandit that walks into the Bellagio at 4 a.m. and steals $1.4 million worth of casino chips off the floor and disappears into the desert night, to a tragedy like 3 and Drowning Creek and Inconceivable Truth, and these shows are all different, but there's a through line, which is you're speaking to me, you're talking to me, you're entertaining me, and you're leaving me with something deeper that is meaningful to my life, that you're sympathetic or empathetic to the people that are here as real humans, not caricatures, right? And I want to talk about it with my friends. Yeah. And that is the through line, and that's exactly what's happening. So,
I'm so happy for you. Not surprised though.
Thank you. Well, I'm not just industry manager guy who puts the chess pieces on the board and says, okay, you guys do the work. Mm-hmm. I can do every bit of this. I've created series on my own. I can, do the interviews. I edit, I produce, I write scripts, I do all those things. And I do that to prove to myself that I can do it, but I also want to earn the credibility of everyone I'm working with that says this guy is not some bum that's just going to put his name on it, and take all the credit. I want to be in there with people, but also give them the space to be able to tell their story their way with their sound and their approach. And it's very, very important to me that they understand that.
Wow. Jason, it's fantastic. And so the brand is what you're imprinting on every show, the quest for quality, the quest to move people through the power of words and quality production and storytelling and transporting us to a place that we may never have been. So I think that is your brand purpose, is to to deliver that.
I think it's my life's purpose.
Oh, I love that.
Getting back to running, they're a little bit of my office hours where I have this hour-long space to be able to kind of imagine what that world looks like, to be able to challenge myself, but also the teams, and see if I'm actually being transported. And I come up with kind of so many crazy things. And the other thing I just want to say is things are moving really quickly in this world.
Yes.
The thing that was important at 8 a.m. is now not important at noon. And even though there's a lot of incredible stories to be told, as a history and political science major and someone that has that in the back of his brain, I can't stop thinking about the fact that so many stories are out there in the wide open, and if we just opened our eyes and ears, we might actually be able to tell these stories before they're forgotten, because if we don't excavate these stories, they will be forgotten forever.
Yes.
So when I do stories about the Dixie Mafia or gangsters from the 70s or Noble, if I'm not telling them or someone else isn't telling them, then
That's right.
We're never going to tell them again. And I do think these used to be the stories that were in Vanity Fair or full features in New York Times Magazine or something like that. I used to obsessively read these on airplane flights before we had seat-back entertainment. And I tell lots of those writers that you could be a podcast star and your brand would not just live for the 30-day window that 1 month magazine article popped.
Yeah.
You have the opportunity to have that story be told for years and years and years. Why are we still talking about cereal? Because it still resonates with people.
Yeah.
Why are we still talking about Atlanta Monster or Noble or whatever those titles are? Because it still matters. Boomtown is going to be a TV series. It's going to be out in November, finally, and it'll hit more than ever. That magic doesn't disappear because of time, but you got to grab onto it.
Yeah. So, Jason Hoch, I think that means you are the gift that keeps on giving.
I hope so.
Thank you.
I hope so. I probably drive my wife nuts at night talking about all this stuff and all the ideas and the stories, but she said, good job. Keep doing it.
Yeah.
Let me know when it's live.
Please, Jason, keep doing it because you're a gift to all of us. Really appreciate your time here.
You're
nice
welcome.
to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Love talking to Jason, learned so much, and now you're going to learn about how to boost podcast discovery and why I am so popular at cocktail parties with these two little things. It's Mathew Passy with his new Podcast Beacon. From Podcast Movement 2024. Matthew Passy, hello.
Hello, E.B.
Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
It's Mathew.
Yes.
Mathew with one T, so people know how to find you. But, people should know how to find you because you have like a beacon out in the world, right?
That is true. We are creating and promoting the Podcast Beacon. It's a NFC device that makes sharing your content as simple as a tap.
I am the proud owner of an Insider Interviews beacon. I look like the cool kid in town, even at Podcast Movement, where, it's not just fell off the turnip truck kind of people.
True.
Yeah. So tell us more about the product and how it came about.
Sure. So I remember being in a store, buying something, and then at the register they had a little table stand that said Google review, tap here.
Oh.
You tap your phone and it takes you to the website so you can review that business on Google, which is like, oh, that's very clever, right? Reviews are very helpful. And then a few days later I kept thinking about it. I was like, why can't we use this for podcasting? So started to do some research to see what other forms the NFC will come in, and we discovered lots of them, but notably we saw that you can get them in bracelets.
And NFC, you mean?
Near field communications.
Oh, see?
Also a part of what's known as the RFID chips, which I don't know what that stands for, but...
But I know I've got one in my bag in case anyone tries to steal my laptop, right?
Right, something that kind of protect you. But so all NFCs are RFID, but not all RFID are NFCs.
And say that in a sentence 3 times fast. Okay. All right, that's awesome. What were you doing before you had this epiphany about the Google sign?
Before that, I used to run a podcast production and consulting business that I sold in 2023. And so since then, I've been kind of messing around with all sorts of ideas in the podcasting world. We do something called custom podcast solutions. So the Beacon is one of the products that came out of that. We're doing custom podcast woodwork. We do custom studio builds.
Wait, custom podcast woodwork?
Correct.
This seems very linear for a digital world.
It is, but you have your beautiful studio, everyone's doing video work, and you want some really nice things in the background. And so we can take your podcast work and we can engrave it, or we can laser engrave it, or we can, actually cut out wood to match your branding. And so we can put up a really nice, classy looking sign on your wall out of wood.
Wow.
And other materials that we're working with.
I think the Insider Interviews logo would look well with that.
I believe it would.
Okay, thank you. So have you gotten this in the hands of a lot of brands? Are you really dealing with independent podcasters? I know it's relatively new, but let's talk about how it might scale.
So right now, actually, Podcast Movement is kind of like a beta test launching pad. So we've given them to folks like yourselves to have and bring here. So far, the reaction has been great. We have a bunch of them on us so that if anybody wants one, we can give it to them while we're here as well. And ideally, once we get the buzz out about it, we will set up a store that anybody can just order one, get one, and it'll be ready to go when they get it. And in the future, the hope is that not only will you have a beacon to promote your own show, but ideally a creator like yourself might get 100 or 200 of these, give them to their fans, and have your fans become promoters of your show too.
Oh my gosh, influencer merch. I love it. I think that's great. A lot of what happens in the show is talking about how we're going to market and amplify awareness of shows. And that's like, with 400,000 active shows out there, it's pretty challenging. So thank you for the service you're doing to the industry, Mathew.
Our pleasure.
Mathew.
We are trying to solve whatever problems we can for podcasters.
So the big topic is user engagement or user experience, rather. So how do you think that this helps with the UX of a podcast listener or the brand?
So one of the reasons why we thought this was a good idea is because the interaction of getting someone to sign up for your podcast is cumbersome.
It is.
You meet somebody in person, you say, oh, you have a podcast, what is it? They have to take out their phone, they have to find their podcast app, they have to search for it. Then they have to turn the phone around and show you and be like, is this the right one? Because 87 shows might have the same name. Then they hit follow. The idea here is if somebody says I have a podcast, they tap their phone and boom, they're taken to your show. So it should make it more seamless for you to grow your show with in-person interactions. And truthfully, we talk about all the digital hacks, all the, social media, newsletter, all the methods for people use for growing their podcast, when the truth is the latest podcast that you started listening to, most likely it was a referral from someone you know, like, or trust.
Yep.
So if someone you know, like, or trust is wearing a beacon and says, try this podcast, smooths out the process considerably.
I think this is brilliant. It's so finger on the pulse or wrist on the pulse if you're wearing my beacon like I am. So have you seen any other really cool innovations here, or not even here, in general, that wows you?
Oh, there's so many very cool innovations happening in the podcasting space. One of the big ones is definitely the all-in-one podcasting platforms. You take a Riverside that will record for you, edit for you, create your show notes for you, generate clips for you. Just that idea of streamlining everything, I think, is really great. And there are definitely more services like that, I think, coming down the pike, hopefully from us, but definitely from lots of others. And I think just like this, the portability of it.
Yep.
Right? Just being able to find someone, quickly grab them, and start recording on the fly. It just makes this such a easier medium for people to create for and enjoy and spread the word and generate good content.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making this easy for me. You're an excellent off-the-hook guest.
15 years of radio, we'll do that.
Mathew Passy, thank you so much. I'm going to add a link to the show notes for where people can get their own beacon very soon.
Thank you very much. Great to see you.
So that's it. If you're in podcasting, take a page from Jason Hoch's playbook and learn how to put your own signature mark on all of your content, and then get it discovered with help from Mathew Passy and his podcast Beacon. And it's really so important to share, rate, review, follow this show wherever you like to get your B2B podcasts. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank John Clayton, my Grammy-winning friend, for creating the theme music. I'm E.B. Moss.